Let's talk about the Prospects Challenge, because when we talk about having a successful weekend, I think that is understating the fact. The Penguins go a perfect 3-0 and essentially win the tournament. There's not really a big to do about who's winning the tournament, who's getting the championship, but the Penguins for the second consecutive season have the best record of all 6 teams that are at the Prospects Challenge. They had a 6-3 win over the Boston Bruins on Friday, a 4-2 win over the Ottawa Senators on Saturday, and an 8-5 win over the Buffalo Sabres yesterday evening. Again, second straight year with their best record, a really solid weekend of hockey for the Penguins prospects. And I think when I look at this, there's obviously a lot of the discussion about, which players stepped up, which players had breakouts, which players kind of stole the show. I think there's 2 that, in my eyes, outside of a lot of really good honorable mentions, Sergei Murashov and Avery Hayes both had very good weekends. Murashov, of course, it was his first competitive action in North America. We talked leading up to this that every time he stepped on the ice, he became the story. I think it's fair to say that he did the same thing over the weekend. Now, he wasn't perfect by no means, but again, the Penguins were 3-0. Murashov played 6 of the 9 periods between the pipes for the Penguins, including the only goaltender, I should say, to get a full game. I think that the Penguins see a lot of things coming up for Murashov very quickly, considering how much they wanted to see of him at this Prospects Challenge. And the last thing I'll say about the goaltending is I really do feel for Taylor Gauthier. I mean, the guy was the ECHL goalie of the year, and now he's surpassed by the 20-year-old, 21-year-old Russian goaltender, Sergei Murashov.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Who knows? Maybe he still has an NHL career ahead of him.
Maybe.
It just doesn't look like it's going to be here with the way Blomqvist performed last year and the way Murashov performed this year, and the 2 NHL goaltenders that are already on the roster.
Yeah,
that could be around for a little bit longer. It's unfortunate, but I mean, it's tough when you are a goalie and there's only 2 spots on an NHL roster, really, sometimes 3, depending on the team, and that goes per team. Just that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's unfortunate for him, but for the Penguins, they have a good problem to have here.
Yeah,
a couple of NHL goalies on the roster, a couple of budding NHL goalies or future NHL goalies right behind them, and Murashov stealing the show is for a late round pick, huge, and they clearly wanted to see a lot from him. And judging by, I didn't see a ton of the Prospect Challenge games, but judging by what Twitter was saying, by what you're saying, and by how the score outcomes looked, he's impressing. He's been given the push, and he is taking his opportunities.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned it. It's a tough position because if you're the 5th best goaltender in the Penguins organization, you're an ECHL starting goaltender. If you're the 5th best center in the Penguins organization, you're moved over to the wing and you're playing in the NHL pretty much the entire season. So it's a tough position to crack. And Taylor Gauthier is a guy who stepped up to the challenge last year. Again, hope that he gets some AHL opportunities. Hope that he gets some opportunities to prove that he can move up in rank. But it is tough when you're behind 2 studs like Joel Blomqvist and Sergei Murashov. The other name I mentioned was Avery Hayes, and this is really deja vu because last year at the Prospects Challenge, everybody said, wow, Avery Hayes, sneaky, solid weekend. Nothing sneaky about his weekend, including a 5-point performance on Monday night where he had a hat trick and 2 assists for the Penguins to clinch that final game against Buffalo. Avery Hayes is a name that you are going to hear a lot more about this year. Last year, he had about 20 some odd games at the AHL level. This year, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And he's a name that, everybody wanted to see: the McGroartys, the Ponomarevs, the Koivunins, the Owen Pickerings on the back end, Emil Pienaniemi and Murashov. Avery Hayes was on the first line, and he was not a passenger on that first line. He was somebody who was driving play a lot for the Penguins, and he's somebody that I'm very excited to see how he can build off of this, right? Last year we said, and every year we say, all right, who had a good Prospects Challenge? What can they do once the big boys get on the ice? Because they're not going to go, toe-to-toe a lot with the Crosbys and the Malkins, but in those inter-squad scrimmages, they're going to have some shifts against them. How does Avery Hayes kind of build off of what he started in Buffalo over this weekend?
Yeah, watching him build on, like you said, what he just started in Buffalo is going to be huge. I'm trying to nail down what kind of contract he's got rolling with him right now. because though there's some work to be had there if he is to become a legitimate option for the NHL roster. Again, maybe not this year, but he's 21, can play a full season in the AHL, and then maybe earn his way into an NHL deal for next season. Again, this team is building for the future, and is. I don't want to say they're one of the more underrated prospect pools in the league, because they are still ranked pretty low, and rightfully so in a lot of cases. And I think maybe I look at them as underrated because I focus on them quite a bit. We're always discussing prospects between the two of us. I spent a lot of time digging into who is good and bad in the Penguins prospect pool without really looking into a bunch of others. So the way I see it is the Penguins like the top guys they got. And if these new names can keep kind of forcing their way into the conversation, again, I'm not saying the Penguins can be a great team with this core of prospects, but they can be a solid NHL team if that core of prospects develops correctly, develops nicely. And with $19 million in cap space, Kyle Dubas builds a nice team around them of other more proven NHLers.
Yeah, speaking of Avery Hayes' contract, just to clean that one up, he has 1 year left on an American Hockey League contract with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So
there you go.
He signed a 2-year deal before last season, so we'll see if he's able to kind of earn himself that next deal, because he's going into a contract year. I mentioned there were a couple honorable mentions, Rutger McGroarty and Vasily Ponomarev, who were Hayes' line mates on the Penguins' top line. McGroarty, of course, went out there and did what we wanted him to do, like show that you are one of the best players on the ice this weekend. He did that from front to back, and the one thing that was evident from the drop of the puck on Friday, his first shift, he had, I think, 3 body checks in on the forecheck and forced a couple turnovers. His forechecking game is going to earn him a lot of acclaim from Mike Sullivan, but so too with Vasily Ponomarev. That's a name that, obviously we knew because he came over in the Gensel deal, which is high profile, and everybody that follows the Penguins is going to look at that name and say, all right, what can you do now? But I thought he looked really good, especially on a line together with McGroarty and with Hayes, and Ponomarev's forechecking as well was something that, man, if these two can continue to build together, in the case that McGroarty doesn't make the NHL team out of camp, that's going to be a scary duo whenever they're together, if they're together in the American Hockey League. Again, I lean towards McGroarty being somebody who makes the roster, but you never know what's going to happen, what's going to play out over the next 2 weeks. But both of them looked good. And the last honorable mention that I have, Tristan Brose. This is a name that kind of, after he was drafted, he kind of faded into the back. He had a rough year at the University of Minnesota, which is why our friend State of Hoppy, who was on the show last week, doesn't like to talk about it very much. He ends up leaving, going to Denver, winning a national championship, creating a lot of buzz around him last year with the season that he had. Signs his contract with Pittsburgh, and he looked, we talk about McGroarty needing to look like one of the best players out there. Tristan Brose, every time he stepped on the ice, the talent jumps off of the screen at you. He has a heavy one-timer. It connected on Friday for a beautiful goal against the Bruins. He just missed the net on Monday on a similar shot in the same area on the power plays, but this is a guy that is going to be extremely entertaining all season long. I'm very excited to see what Brose has in store. And again, I think he's a long shot to make his NHL debut this season. I think a lot would have to go right for him, but he is certainly somebody who has elevated his stature within the organization tenfold over the last 6 or 7 months.
I could see an NHL debut this season. Here's my rationale.
Maybe a cup of coffee, but
yeah. It would be injury replacement. It would be the Penguins are in injury trouble with high-end guys, not necessarily the depth. It is starting the season in the AHL, starting with an impressive camp preseason, and then starting the season in the AHL and continuing that impressive run, and then injury troubles happen because it's the Penguins, and that's bound to happen. Knock on wood. There you go. They're due for an injury-riddled season almost. So keeping guys like Tristan Brose at the ready, and a bunch of other names that we'll discuss in a few minutes at the ready, if he is impressing enough, I could see, like you're saying, a quick cup of coffee NHL debut this season to see what he's got under him, especially if he impresses through camp, through preseason, and through the start of the AHL season.
Yeah, and again, a lot of things got to go right for him, but I am excited to see what he has and the development that he's able to have, because when you look at Wilkes-Barre this year, I mean, he's down there. You would imagine one or both of Ponomarev and Koivunen are down there. You have Pickering, who will be down there. Beliveau was interesting. He did not play on Monday, but he was very interesting on Friday. That was the game where, like I called him a loud defenseman on Twitter. It's because he's similar to, and I don't want to make this comparison as in the players are the same, but similar to Carlson. You will hear his name and you will see him a lot. He's not a defenseman that's going to fade into the back and just be the Marcus Pettersson. Hey, haven't heard much about him. Well, that's a good thing. He is somebody who's going to jump up into the play. He's somebody who likes the puck on his stick. He had a loud performance on Friday, a couple of penalties, but he's a name that I'm intrigued to see where they put him to start this year. He spent a lot of time in the ECHL last year. Do they give him that opportunity in the A? I think that's something to follow along with as well.